Well, good evening, everyone. Thank you for joining us. I'm State Representative Laurie Stone, and I represent House District 28, which is West Warren and Centerline. Tonight, with some special guests. Did I get it close?
Yes, you are. No, you did it right.
Okay. And then he's a thoracic surgeon with Henry Ford Health Systems. And I also have special guests from CARE of Southeast Michigan and fellow coalition members with the Warren Centerline Prevention Coalition, Dunia Barash and Trinity Delgado. Good to see you this evening. And then we also have a guest community educator from CARE of Southeast Michigan. Rebecca is going to share some additional information this evening. But we selected the focus for this evening's event to be vaping. It's a very timely topic and with some serious health implications. Last year, we did a focus on opioids. We tapped into some community resources and networks. But we want to open the discussion for the community, for families, for parents and teenagers about vaping. There are a lot of myths out there about vaping being the healthy option or an opportunity to transition from cigarettes. But we also, and that was before we had a lot of scientific research to draw on. But we've noticed that that isn't necessarily true. We want to make sure that we are better informed. So when we're making decisions and choices, we have that to draw from. So I would like to hand it off to Dr. Al-Najjar. And I wanted to just hear some of the health implications of vaping and how does it compare to smoking. We already know health concerns about smoking. So can you share with us some of your experiences?
So thank you, Laurie, for inviting me today. And I know we did that last year, where at that time we had a lot of media coverage. Specifically, at that time, we had a lot of reports coming from the CDC talking about relationship between vaping and lung injury. And we have patients who has been reported sick, being on the ventilator for a long time, and some of them we have some fatalities and cases and young people who died actually just being on from the vaping. And at that time there was a lot of controversy whether it is related to vaping or not, what's going on, is it certain types. And I think from that time we get to know more and more about that. And to start with, we know that e-cigarettes or vaping starting was introduced in the market in 2003, I think. And there are, I think, almost fourth generation right now. Between the first one, which was almost close to cigarette smoking, now to the fourth generation, which is actually, I think, it's the most dangerous one, which is what is called in the market the jewel thing, that where it's easy to handle, it's easy to use, and it's something like a lot of young people, especially adolescents and teens, they think that it's something something interesting to use or to try. So that's one of the things about the vaping. So at this point, I think I'm trying to look into some of the numbers that I have. So, for example, CDC in 2019 stated that I think adolescents are more at risk with e-cigarettes. In 2017, I think it was about they start to see that the adolescents are more likely than adults to use the e-cigarettes, and there was only 2.8% of e-cigarette users are usually adults, and most of them are adolescents. But actually, in 2019, there are more than 3.6 million middle schoolers and high schoolers who are reported to use e-cigarettes. Actually, 1 out of 5 high schoolers and 1 out of 20 middle schooler students actually reported to use vaping or e-cigarettes, which is really a very scary number. And so these are the numbers that coming up more and more from the CDC. And yes, we don't have at this point a full evidence or what's the long-term effect of vaping. Is it going to be like smoking? Is it going to cause cancer? Um, I can tell you my own experience or my own theory is that there is nothing worse than smoking. So smoking is probably, and cigarettes is the worst ever thing that human being invented. You know, I don't think there is anything you can get as harmful as cigarette smoking. However, we don't know the long-term effect of vaping. Okay, at this point, we know it's for the last few years. Is it going to cause cancer in 15, 20 years? Is it going to cause some other different cancers? What we know for sure, it does cause lung damage. So there is a lot or a wide spectrum of diseases or injuries that can affect the lung specifically are related to vaping. Some of it can be mild, but some of it can be permanent damage to the lung or actually even respiratory, what we call respiratory failure and permanent lung damage and or death. It's also, it is also linked to nicotine addiction. So sometimes, specifically in adolescents, the fact that you start by vaping, it might be an entry point for later on for smoking or even for drugs, which is the most scary part because the psychology of the human being and the brain might, once you start to get into the habit of trying things like this, eventually you might get into the next step, which is smoking or might be even more dangerous drugs. And also there are some reports from the CDC saying that vaping is related to decreased brain development and mood disorders. People who have more, there are reports of having more either depression or anxiety or bipolar disorders related to vaping. And it's all related to the material that has been used in vaping, whether it's nicotine or marijuana or whatever it is. There are a wide variety of things that can you put on the vaping, and that can affect your brain, your lung, your body, and your even thinking in the future and behavior.
I was speaking with someone who said that they felt like the results of vaping are doing to lungs in 5 years what it took 35 years for cigarettes to do. Is that something you see? Does it progress rapidly?
That is true. I mean, smoking, if you smoke cigarettes, definitely you're not going to have lung damage for years. I mean, it could happen sooner, but most of the time, the average of lung damage or emphysema, it's probably 10 or more than 10 years, sometimes even 20, 30 years. Definitely smoking after 15 to 20 years. I mean, lung cancer. But the problem with vaping is like sometimes you can have it immediate. There are cases I've seen patients who came within days of vaping and they have significant severe lung damage. And some of them has been reversible, but some of them might be actually permanent. And some of them might end up on oxygen or have a permanent lung damage in the future that can be irreversible.
Yeah, it was very frightening last year when there was a whole outbreak of people with this severe lung damage that was hospitalizing them, especially in young people. And reading about, lung transplants for someone who goes in, they think that they're doing something that, everybody's doing it. And they end up hospitalized with some serious complications.
Yeah, and the scary part is that you don't know why. You don't know why X or Y get to have the lung damage, and somebody else who vape for many, many years and nothing happened. It's the same for smoking. You have people who smoke for 30 years and they don't have any effect on their lung and no lung cancer. And you have people who smoke for 5 years and they have significant or bad lung cancer. And that doesn't mean that you can say, well, there are people who smoke, so I might be one of those people. That's not really scientific. But the fact that we don't know the mechanism. And I think it has to do with our body and our genes and other factors. So definitely. And I'll be honest with you, one thing I want to add is right now with the COVID. So the COVID and the lung injury that can happen from COVID, there are people who might end up with permanent lung injury. And, you know, to add to it, vaping and smoking is going to be more and more interesting to see how much it will affect our, you know, people lungs and have lung damage.
Well, thank you. I hope you can stick around with us a little longer. I'm going to pull in a couple more presenters, and then we're going to turn it over to some questions. I want to introduce Dunya Barish from Warren Centerline Prevention Coalition and CARES of Southeast Michigan to talk a little bit about the Warren Centerline Prevention Coalition and introduce our guest presenter, Rebecca.
Sounds good. Before we get started, I just want to make sure Rebecca's all set to go. I don't think that she's able to open her video. So
okay. I will screen share from my end then.
Okay.
If you want to go ahead and introduce.
Sounds good. So hi, everyone. My name is Dunya Barish, and I work at CARE of Southeastern Michigan. I'm the program supervisor for community organizing. And one of the things that we do is we work with coalitions all throughout the community. We serve about 10 different coalitions throughout Macomb County, and specifically in Warren and Centerline, we work with the Warren Centerline Prevention Coalition, and their mission is to prevent and educate our youth and community on the use and abuse of alcohol, tobacco, and other drugs. And today we're really here to talk about how the coalition works towards addressing the impact of vaping for youth and how you as community members can partake in some of that work. So the Warren Centerline Prevention Coalition first started in the mid-1990s, so we've been around for quite a while, and we've ebbed and flowed throughout the years, but we continue to meet every single month on the last Monday of every month. And so we ask you that if you are interested in joining, our next meeting is July 27th at 1 o'clock via Zoom. And we'll share all of that stuff with attendees via Facebook and different social media outlets so that they can continue to stay involved. We wanted to give community members 3 different takeaways from this vaping webinar. So we thought about 3 different ways that you as community members can do different things to help with the impact of youth vaping and how we can be active in our communities. And every one of us has different comfort levels. Maybe some of us are comfortable going and sharing a Facebook page or liking the page. Some other people may be comfortable sharing a fact online or just letting people know that, hey, this is something that you care about and feel is important. And our last ask is getting a little bit more involved and being able to read the Partnership for Drug-Free Kids on what you need to know to protect and help your children, teens, and young adults. So our number one ask is for community members that are looking for different things that they can do specifically in relation to youth vaping epidemic. You can connect with the Warren Centerline Prevention Coalition by following or liking our Facebook page, which is at WCPC for Change on Facebook. The next thing you can do is share our new infographic on Facebook or any post that you feel is impactful that shares information on vaping and its harmful effects to our youth. There are several things all over, but one of our newest ones includes some of the different facts about what chemicals are in there, how vaping isn't just water vapor, and that actually 1 Juul pod is equal to 20 cigarettes. And so that is included on the infographic, and that's something that we'll be sharing out to participants and on the Facebook page. And then finally, something that may take a little bit more time for someone who's looking to make a difference with the impact of youth vaping is the Partnership for Drug-Free Kids has an awesome guide of what we can do as community members and as parents and just generally people that are serving the youth, what they can do to help and protect our children around vaping. So I encourage all of you to check out those 3 different actions and figure out what feels best for you. And please join us at our next coalition meeting, which is July 27th at 1 p.m. And we meet via Zoom currently because of the COVID-19, and just everybody has different areas of comfort, and we just want to meet people where they're at. And so currently being able to meet through Zoom is working really well. And one last thing before I go, one thing that our coalition is actively working on, and we have all really voiced how this is important to us, we want to create a more diverse coalition, and we want to make sure that our coalition represents the community that we're serving. So I highly encourage anyone that is interested or knows of someone that may be interested in participating in helping our youth make healthy decisions, keeping our community drug-free, and overall just being able to work for the better of the community, to join us and reach out. Thank you.
Thank you, Dunya. I am having some technical difficulties. Is Rebecca, are you able to, I promoted you to co-host. Are you able to access screen share now?
Yes, I am.
Perfect.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
Welcome. Thank you for joining us tonight.
Thank you for having me. I am very excited to be here. As a community health educator with Care of Southeastern Michigan, the bulk of my job involves substance use prevention education with students as young as preschool and all the way through 12th grade. And vaping is, of course, a huge, huge topic. And as we heard, there are a lot of concerning health effects. So I am really excited to talk about a couple of basic pieces of information about what are vapes, why are teens vaping. We heard some of the trends, but we're going to look at our Macomb County trends as well. Some legislative changes that we've seen in response to this epidemic, and some prevention and intervention strategies that we can apply in our communities. So as we may already know, vapes are typically comprised of the same components. There are different variations and different types, and vapes and e-cigarettes and ENDS, or electronic nicotine delivery systems, these are all synonymous. And they'll have a battery, which powers the atomizer, which is the heating element, which turns the e-liquid in the cartridge into that aerosol that users are inhaling when they're vaping. And as I mentioned, there are many different types. It's a pretty expansive market. And pictured here are some of the more common types, and especially when we're talking about youth. On the top left, that is the Juul, of course. And Juul was so big with youth when vaping was becoming more popular that juuling was actually the verb to describe the process of vaping. And some students didn't even recognize that juuling and vaping were the same thing. So Juul was a really popular vape. It's a little bit more obscure now. It's kind of yesterday's news, and we'll talk about why that is. But those middle images on the top, the Posh and the Puff Bar, these are disposable vapes that are huge with youth right now. On the top right, those are some open tank systems, and the bottom left as well. Open tank vapes come with empty cartridges. They don't already have e-liquid already filled in them, and it's up to the consumer to take the e-juice and fill up their products. And on the bottom, the 3 right images, those are vapes that we see more often used with THC. So that's another main concern when we're looking at vapes. We're focusing mainly on nicotine tonight, but when we're talking about sharing vapes and that social aspect and peer pressure and youth sharing with each other, really, they don't know exactly what they're inhaling when they're sharing those vapes. So THC is, of course, a big concern. We like to include the rate of cigarette smoking among youth because it can give us some hope. So we see the numbers of youth cigarette smokers steadily declining over years. And sometimes people will say, well, when vapes came on the market, of course, cigarette smoking dropped among youth. But really, we see those numbers declining a lot sooner. So we can backtrack a little bit and see what works. What kind of strategies were we implementing to encourage this decline in the numbers? And these are a lot of the strategies that we are in the midst of today. There is constantly new research and data emerging. And as we know, we don't know the long-term health consequences, but that data is in the works. CARE and so many different organizations are always involved in prevention education, going into schools and educating youth about what these products really contain and what they really do to us. Because unfortunately, there's a lot of myth and misinformation surrounding these products that were really perpetuated off the cuff when they were introduced as these safer alternatives to smoking. There are counter advertising campaigns. There are cessation programs that are built specifically to cater to teens and youth. Text programs, and I'm going to share those resources at the end too because they're very valuable. Rising costs, of course, and taxes have been effective in reducing numbers of cigarette smokers, and of course, we've seen a lot of restrictive laws emerging around cigarette smoking, and we're seeing some new legislation around vaping as well, which we're hoping will be helpful. The numbers, of course, are concerning. As we heard, there are a large number of teenagers who are vaping. So most recently, we know it's 1 in 4 12th graders who have vaped nicotine over the past month. And this is a really specific piece of information when we're talking about nicotine vaping. In the National Monitoring the Future survey of 2018, the categories were a little more broad, where the survey addressed teens who said that they were vaping just flavoring. And this is one of those big myths that we dispel, because what we know is there are vape juices and e-liquids that claim to be nicotine free, but the fact is 99% of vape juices, the majority of vape juices actually do have at least trace amounts of nicotine. So it's important that teens know and youth know that there's no such thing as safe vaping. And even if there was some nicotine-free vape juice, there's still so many other chemicals that are harmful for us to be inhaling. But we know that this is a youth epidemic. And when we look at the Macomb County numbers in particular, we see a really concerning rise in the number of middle school students who are vaping, and the percentage of high school students vaping almost doubled in 2 years. It's important for us to recognize too that there really is no stereotypical demographic of youth who are using these products. It would be very unwise for any school or any community to say, well, that's not a problem here. That's only a problem in other schools or other communities. Unfortunately, it's a widespread problem. Working with youth even who are homeschooled, talk about encountering vapes and peer pressure in church youth groups. So it's really important that we address this head on in all cases. In response to this youth epidemic, there have been some legislative changes that we're hoping are going to impact those numbers as we see those surveys emerging in coming years. And notably, the federal age limit for purchasing and using tobacco products was raised in December of last year to 21 years old. And based on the FDA's deeming rule in 2016, ENDS and vape products are considered tobacco products. So that even includes that nicotine-free e-juice. Any sort of vaping is considered to be a tobacco product. So consumers have to be 21 years or older to purchase these products. That's significant because when we're talking to middle school students and really any youth and teens and asking them, how are you getting your hands on these vapes? Some of them say that they're getting it from high school students who are selling them. So really restricting the access to school-age students. Hopefully we'll see a trickle down to reduced access in those younger adolescent years. Additionally, the FDA did ban fruit and mint flavored pre-filled pods for refillable systems. And so we're looking at things like Juul. And in the bottom right-hand corner, there's an image of one of those pre-filled Juul pods. And these flavors specifically were banned because they're big with youth. They're very enticing flavors. Now, that's why Juul is yesterday's news. They were big in the beginning because they're small, they're easily concealable, and those pre-filled pods are really user-friendly. Once they are empty, then you dispose of them and just put them with a new pod. This is a good start, but there are some big loopholes that we need to address in future legislation. So, of course, tobacco and menthol flavors are still available. Juuls are still on the market in those flavors. But when we're looking at those open tank systems, those vapes that have those empty pods that consumers use juice in a separate bottle to fill up, that has the entire gamut of flavors and fruit flavors and dessert flavors and anything that you can imagine. Those are not quite as enticing, not quite as popular with youth. The real problem right now that we're seeing explode are those disposable vapes, those Poshas and those puff bars that are shaped kind of like jewels, that come in all sorts of different colors and come in all sorts of different flavors. So they're not rechargeable. You just dispose of the entire system once it's empty. And this is what's really big. So we need to expand this legislation to encompass all of those vape products, whether it's used for open tank systems or disposable vapes, because those flavors are huge. And we saw that as an effective step in legislation for cigarette smoking, right? We used to have flavored cigarettes and all sorts of different flavors. So taking those next steps for vapes will be imperative to reduce this youth epidemic in vaping. So how do we end up here? How do we end up in the midst of an epidemic? Why are teens doing it? Experimentation, of course, that is the most frequently responded reason in this data from 2019 to see what it's like. And experimentation is a normal part of development. It's important for us to help us establish independence and our identity. Of course, teens want to try new things. So it's important in our communities and our schools and our households to provide safe and healthy opportunities to experience thrills and take risks and try new things, because teens are naturally hardwired to want to do that. So we have to be able to provide that in a safer context. The second most common reason, of course, because it tastes good. So we're looking at those flavors. Again, that's a huge piece of this puzzle. And I think that ties in with the third most common reason, to have a good time with their friends. So vaping is a social experience now. And I think those two go hand in hand because of the novelty of trying flavors and sharing vapes with one another and trying out this new flavor that your friend has. So those are big pieces of the puzzle. And we're not going to go through all of these different reasons, but we won't move on without addressing the next one, which is huge: to relax or relieve tension, which increased by over a third from 2018. And this is significant. This is what we hear often when we're talking to teens in our community, in our schools, middle school and high school. Teens have stress. And this is something that I address anytime I go into a classroom and talk to teens and talk about vaping as a coping mechanism. I ask them about their stress, and then I ask them about adults' responses to their stress. Because when I reflect on my experience as a teen and telling adults that I felt stressed, adults said to me, "You don't know what stress is. You're too young." And I asked teens about that. Has your stress been dismissed or invalidated by adults? And unfortunately, a lot of them say, yeah, that's been their experience. So it's important for us as adults to recognize that their stress is real. There are teens that are dealing with anxiety and depression and don't know what their resources are. So whether it's in the home and having those kinds of open conversations where we're listening and not saying things like, "You'll get over it," or "That's just life," or "This will pass, just go with it," really listening and being present with them is important to let them know that we're on their side and can help them. And having adequate mental health resources in school is also crucial. These are big pieces of the puzzle. Teens have a whole host of challenges that a lot of us didn't even have to deal with in our development, with social media and technology and all those different stressors. They need ways to cope with these new challenges, and it's up to us to help teach them healthy ways to cope. One more piece about those flavors. Marketing is so insidious, and this is something else that we emphasize to youth as well. We ask them, vape companies introducing vaping, do you think that their main goal is to make sure you're healthy? You think that's their main priority? No. What's their priority? What do they want? To make money. So they take these brands that teens recognize and trust and like and use them to sell their products, to catch their eye and draw them in. And do adults use these products too? Sure. But adults are the outer circles of the target. Youth are the bullseye. They're the center. And we explain to them that that's the point. They want to get the largest amount of customers as they can, and they want long-term customers. So the goal is to get them young and keep them addicted as long as possible. And then there are things like that Juul ad that has those two friends sharing a vape with one another. Of course, that's sending the message, share this Juul with your friends. Friends vape together. And I asked them to look at these hands and say, well, how old do you think the owners of these hands are? You think these are adults that are wearing candy bracelets? No, there are these marketing tricks that get into their head and tell them this product is for you. And unfortunately, they know just where to get them on social media. So marketing is another huge piece of the puzzle. And that's another reason that these flavors need to go. Nicotine harms the developing brain. Of course, we were just talking about nicotine's harmful effects. So when we're talking about Juul pods or Posh or the puff bars, these all for one pod or one device that's disposable, they all have about the same amount of nicotine as a pack of cigarettes. Because vaping is so inconspicuous, because there isn't really much, if any, of a scent afterwards, and because it doesn't have that same kind of harsh feeling as smoking, teens can vape quite a bit. We asked them, how many Juul pods, back when Juul was really big, how many Juul pods have you heard of your peers vaping in a day? And, you know, it could be 2 or 3 pods, and that equates to 2 or 3 packs of cigarettes. Since our brains aren't fully developed until about our mid-20s, we're looking at some consequences. The Surgeon General identified some of those consequences as long-term impairment in our impulse control and in attention and learning. And as we heard earlier, it primes us for addiction in the future, and it makes it harder to quit in the long term. We explain it to youth as laying the foundation, laying the building blocks of their brain. And when they're programming that addiction in their brain and want to quit in their 20s or 30s or 40s, it's going to be a lot harder once those patterns have already been solidified. So we emphasize to them always that if this is something you're struggling with, this is the best time of all to quit before that concrete has really set in your brain. Of course, one of the big myths, I think that was a lot more popular when vaping was just being introduced is, oh, it's just water vapor. We know, of course, that's not the case. It's actually an aerosol. It's a collection of those ultrafine solid particles, not a harmless water vapor. And those solid particles, a lot of them are known carcinogens that are also in combustible cigarettes. And these are just some of the chemicals. There's a whole host of chemicals. And when we bring this into schools, we have examples of household items that have chemicals in common with vapes, like benzene and rat poison. So we lay this out and show them that kind of gross history to what is marketed as banana split and maple syrup and things like that, like formaldehyde and arsenic. These aren't really delicious, enticing chemicals. So it's not just flavoring, not just water vapor. We really want people to know what's inside of these vapes that teens are putting into their bodies. What do we do now? We're in the middle of an epidemic. One of the strongest protective factors in substance use prevention and intervention and recovery for youth is having those available adults who they can turn to ask for help, to ask for reassurance. So having those conversations about mental health and coping, having an adult who is unbiased, the more the better. But it doesn't have to be an adult in the home. And sometimes it can't be. You know, there's that love and there's that bond, and that's important. But sometimes the parent or the guardian at home is a little too emotionally invested to hear that, you know, their son or daughter smoked a joint at the party last weekend. So if a teen smoked a joint and wants to talk to an adult about how it made them feel, well, their parent might not be the first person they go to. But if they have someone else to go to, if they have a counselor or an aunt or an uncle or some adult that they can trust and talk to honestly about their experience without being afraid of the recourse, that is extremely valuable. But the more adults, the better. They need to know that they have people on their side who support them and who they can ask for help if they're already addicted, if they're already struggling with this, or if they're afraid that they're going to be exposed to this in some social setting. So how can adults start this conversation? If you're a parent and you think that maybe your teen has already been exposed to this, it's important not to confront them with something like, you better not be stupid enough to vape. We want to explore what they're experiencing, what they're seeing. Something like, I hear that vaping is really big among teens. You don't have to tell me any names, but do you know anybody who's doing this? See what they're experiencing. And if it's something they've encountered, or if they've experienced it, or if they're in the midst of an addiction to nicotine right now, criticizing is going to put them in that defensive place, just like confrontation. So instead of, I can't believe you would do this, I thought you were better than that, empathizing with their experience. Like, wow, that sounds really uncomfortable to have that kind of addiction. It sounds like you really don't like this, or it sounds like you were put in a really tough position there with your friends and that peer pressure. So empathizing and letting them know that you're on their side. And if you're having these conversations, it's important to let them tell you what they know. Instead of just lecturing about what you've heard and what you know, ask them, what have you heard? What have your friends told you? What are people saying at school? What do you see on social media? And don't just tell them, don't just give them the statistics and the data. Say something like, hey, you know what? Let's check the CDC. Let's see what the most recent reports are. Let's see if there's any new research. Let's see what the health consequences are together. Show them and make it that experience that you have together where you're both learning and in that position of being learners together. And if they're experiencing this, if they're struggling with it, it's important not to demand, not to say, you better quit right now or you're grounded forever. Or you better never vape, or you're grounded forever. Offering support, letting them know that you're there to help. Wow, man, you've been vaping for a while. You're really addicted. That sounds like it's really uncomfortable. How can I help? Or, wow, I'm really worried for you. I'm really concerned because of the health consequences. What can I do to help you through this? It's important to remember that every behavior meets a need. We saw all of those different reasons that youth give to explain why they started vaping or why they're vaping. Every behavior meets a need. And if we can isolate the need or needs that are being met by that behavior, whether it's a need for thrill seeking and experimentation, or for social engagement and building bonds and friendships, or just because they're bored, or whatever the case may be, we can find healthy ways to help them meet that need, to replace that with a healthy behavior. There are, as I said, teen cessation programs. And My Life, My Quit is at the top of the list. There's an awesome text program, and texting is the main form of communication for teens. They can text this number, they can get that support over their phone. And even for teens who aren't coming to an adult and asking for help, to popularize these kinds of resources can be really helpful because they can use them and they can be confidential as well. But there are text lines, there are call lines, there are lots of different ways to support youth who are going through this addiction and need help recovering. And to come full circle, we looked at the things that have been effective to reduce cigarette smoking, and we're following that trend for vaping too. We want to see increased costs. We want to see limited venues where teens can access this, and restricted access and use. Like, we can't smoke in restaurants anymore, but unfortunately, clean air laws don't apply to vaping. Individual businesses can, mandate their own vape-free environments, but we need to see this more comprehensively addressed in that kind of access and use. We want to hold retailers responsible. A big part of our job is also providing tobacco vendor education. So any business, any retailer in Macomb County that sells any sort of tobacco products, a big part of our job is teaching them about IDing and making sure that they have the proper signage and making sure that they're following the protocol to ID their customers. And if they don't follow that protocol, if despite our best efforts for education, they're not following that protocol still, they need to be held responsible. And we might even consider raising those fines and making those consequences more severe to inspire as much compliance as possible. We've got counter marketing, we've got counter ads, and an awesome piece that I saw over this quarantine break of school was teens building counter advertisements for each other, peers making counter ads. That really has to be one of the most powerful elements I've seen in prevention, because they know what works for them. They know what appeals to them more than we do. So when that message is coming from their peer groups, their acceptance, of course, is huge at that age. And when they see people that they look up to that are their age, that's really powerful. And of course, community programs and policies. We're doing community education and prevention education in schools. There are many different organizations that are doing this. And so when we keep this up, when we keep implementing these factors with consistency and with dedication, we'll see those numbers fall, just like we've seen with cigarette use. It's just a matter of time and dedication. But we have to be optimistic. And I am optimistic because I see the way teens are talking to each other about this issue. And that is extremely powerful. So that's a really brief and fast overview. But I'd be happy to answer any questions when we get to that point, if anybody had any points that they'd like further clarification on. Oh, Laurie, you're muted.
It helps to be heard. That was a fantastic presentation with lots of good information, Rebecca.
Thank you.
I see that we have some participants, and I want to encourage anyone who has a question for our guests to post in either the Q&A box, which you'll see the icon at the bottom of the screen, or I'll scroll through the chat to see if anyone posted questions. But one question that I had, Dr. Al-Najjar, was what kind of things or warning signs or symptoms should either individuals or parents be concerned of or watch out for or be talking to their doctors about?
Well, if you mean if somebody is vaping and having symptoms, I mean, definitely whenever you have shortness of breath, if you feel like, I feel like I'm getting winded earlier, or I cannot do the same usual daily activity I'm doing, then that's a warning sign about something going on with your lung. Of course, the more, sometimes this is probably the long term. The shorter terms, if you have cough or, fever, or sometimes, changes in your breathing habits, or, but these are the main things. The problem with the symptoms are always non-specific. So, I mean, you could have symptoms and you say, maybe I have a flu, or I have, I'm just sick for the next couple of days. So it's not always related to the vaping. But if you have a progressive shortness of breath that is not getting better over a few hours or a couple of days, then you definitely need to see a physician. The same if you have persistent cough that is not getting better, specifically if it's associated with some phlegm or sputum, or more dangerously, if it's associated with blood. That's really a dangerous sign. And actually, one of the things I don't have evidence about it, but I've noticed it multiple times with young adults who came with what we call hemoptysis, or coughing up blood, and that was related to vaping, specifically marijuana. So if there are marijuana into the vaping, some of them, they get, I don't know if they are susceptible to more of fungal infection or rare types of infections, but I've seen few patients where they came with their symptoms was coughing up blood, and was significant for infection, and they were having a history of vaping, and I remember almost 100% of them, they have marijuana in that vape.
Yeah, this was in the news for a while. Just a follow-up question. I know that a lot of pediatricians have questions that they ask patients about some of these behavioral health choices. Is vaping part of the kind of line of questioning that patients can expect from pediatrics during like an annual physical?
Well, it should, and I'm actually encouraging everybody. As I started recently asking the patients specifically if they are vaping, because usually in our training, we always ask the question when it comes to the social history, we call it. We ask about drinking, smoking, or sometimes drugs. But this is new to us, vaping. And a lot of physicians, they think like when you ask the question of smoking, that means it include vaping. It is not. So a lot of patients, they come to me and say, do you smoke? No. And if you don't ask the question about vaping, you'll find out that they are vaping. So you have to be specific and ask the question, do you vape? And I think all the pediatricians and physicians should ask the question as part of their history taking with the patients.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Rebecca,
I want to say one thing, Rebecca. I mean, that was a phenomenal lecture. I mean, it was very comprehensive. I have two comments. One of them, I mean, I know that you put all these products that can come from the vaping, and the more scary part is that also there are byproducts that come from vaping that we even don't know. It depends about the chemical reaction and the heat production, what byproducts that can happen during the vaping, and we might not even know these dangerous material that can come out, and they can be dangerous to our health. The second thing with about how to prevent, I mean, as an adult, I think if we want to approach the kids and the young adults and adolescents, I think very important, in addition to all what you said, I think it's important for us to educate ourselves. I think we have to know more about vaping. If you don't know much, those kids know much better than us with this. So you have to educate yourself to be able to get into their mentality and what they know about that, so you can actually go into discussion with them. But if you're just gonna think, oh, I know about vaping, it's bad, you're not gonna go anywhere with them.
Huge point. Absolutely. Absolutely. It's important for us to do our homework, and it's a lot to keep up with. It's important for us to stay updated and know what they're vaping and know what the laws are, know what's popular, definitely, and know the dangers. And absolutely, huge points.
I saw a question posted. I don't know if that's something you can speak to, Rebecca. It's asking, how long does it take to get addicted to a vape, vape nicotine or any vape products, if you can speak to it?
To the best of my ability, I can. What I do know is that it's going to be a lot quicker for youth and adolescents because their brain is still developing. They are more susceptible to addiction. So it's probably going to vary from person to person, but where it might take an adult a week, and that's just a projection. I'm not sure if a week is a scientific measurement, but it might take a youth maybe 2 or 3 vape pods or a couple of days. The timing is going to be a lot shorter for youth. And that's what's really concerning. If they want to just try it out with their friends, or if they think they're just going to do it on the weekends or do it once in a while, they can develop an addiction a lot quicker than an adult would.
And I was surprised how much nicotine is in a pod. Can you touch on that again? I was shocked that it was like smoking a pack of cigarettes and it's one little product.
Yes, exactly. And that's another big concern, that the nicotine concentration is so high in one Juul pod or one puff bar or one Posh, those big popular disposable vapes right now. One of those is equivalent to a pack of cigarettes. And where a cigarette smoker would have to go outside and go so many feet away from the building, and it's a lot more conspicuous and a lot more disruptive to smoke a cigarette, so you might end up smoking fewer cigarettes throughout the day. Youth can just mindlessly have that hand-to-mouth motion, that habitual hand-to-mouth motion, and go through a lot more nicotine than a typical cigarette smoker would. So again, we're looking at those really concerning physical health consequences of nicotine, which is a toxin to our body in so many ways. And of course, those brain development components that are really concerning as well. It's difficult for youth to understand as well, because that last part of their brain to develop is the prefrontal cortex. And the prefrontal cortex helps us with decision making. It helps us with that forward thinking, where we can consider consequences of our actions. And it's hard for them to conceptualize that they can actually be doing that long-term damage to their brain by using that nicotine, which is why it's so important to have those education pieces and then have those alternative activity pieces to our prevention efforts and our intervention efforts, where we make sure that they have other options and other things to do to meet those needs. Because it's hard for them to really understand that they're doing long-term damage, can do long-term damage by consuming so much nicotine.
Well, and that's one of the deceptive things. I think when you're around someone who smokes cigarettes or tobacco or cigars, you've got residue that accumulates. You've got the stench that a lot of people can't tolerate. The smoke is very visible. And I think that there's like this illusion that vaping is, you can't really see it. You can't really smell it. It's not everywhere. And you don't have kind of, I don't know if it's called warning signs or something that a deterrent to utilizing it. And as a teacher, I hear that from a lot of my colleagues. So vaping in schools, and especially high school and junior highs, is problematic. For the longest time, they didn't even have legislation that they could take away, these products from students. And it was really easy for them to sneak them into a hoodie or a pocket, use it in class, in the hallway, in a bathroom. And not, the teacher, unless you watch them, might not never know it's happening. And then have some kind of structure to say, that's not healthy. We don't use these in school, and have a grounds to take it away and get it out of the school environment.
Yeah, that's a huge piece. Yeah, that's another reason why vaping is so insidious. Like you said, we don't have the warning signs where if youth was using cigarettes, tobacco, and smoking combustible cigarettes, we'd be able to smell it and we'd know, uh-oh, something's going on here. So it's a little bit harder to pinpoint those uses of vape. But luckily, another thing CARE offers, of course, are those alternative to suspension options, where if a student is caught vaping in school, part of the response from the school can be to mandate some drug education, where students might face a shorter suspension if they come to our organization on a Saturday. And we have that all-day drug prevention where we talk about those consequences, and we talk about a whole spectrum of substance use, since again, using that nicotine and vapes at a young age can prime their brain for addiction down the road. We want to try to put the brakes on that. So that's another great response that has developed in this. But yeah, vaping in schools is a big problem, and it doesn't have the stigma, again, like talking about cigarettes and the stench and turning your fingers yellow and all the things that we know about cigarettes. That's another reason it's so insidious and seems harmless to teens, because it doesn't have that social stigma that comes from being a smelly cigarette smoker.
Okay, I've got another question posed. Can kids get THC vapes? And are they odorless? So we know if they're smoking marijuana joints, you have that skunk smell that you can usually detect. We know that you cannot smoke marijuana recreationally or medicinally in Michigan until you are 21. So what does that look like in the vaping industry?
Well, unfortunately, to the best of my knowledge, I think that THC vapes are still similarly odorless, where there might be some initial smell, but it dissipates pretty quickly. So it's still pretty easily concealed. And when we're looking at those lung injuries that are pretty concretely tied to vaping THC, unfortunately, we know that THC vapes can be bought on the black market, not necessarily through a regulated provider. There are people who can manufacture those juices and provide them to people without authorization. And so that's definitely a huge concern as we're looking at vaping and youth and THC.
Well, I'm going to add one more voice to this conversation for the last couple minutes. Our leader for our local coalition, I believe I added Hal Noonan to our panelists. Hal, are you on? Oh, there he is. Promote to panelist. And this is a conversation I think that we need to continue in our community, and I know it is a priority for our coalition. And there's lots of opportunities for parents to get involved. Our coalition does direct outreach with students, but I want to keep this conversation going. Hal, are you there?
Yes, I am. I think that my video has been disabled, maybe?
Oh, that's okay.
I tried to start video and it said that it had been disabled.
Let me see.
I got kicked off for a second, then I had to rejoin. It took me a second. But anyways, I'll just go ahead and say the Warren Centerline Prevention Coalition serves, of course, Warren and Centerline. We have a bunch of different school districts. I'm a school board trustee for Centerline. I live in Warren. And we also have a trustee from the Fitzgerald School District, Judy Fergal. And we're very interested in getting more school districts involved in the coalition because it's a terrible thing for any kid to get disabled educationally because of alcohol, drug, or tobacco use, and we can actually encourage good developments way beyond that with things like the Paper People program. I'm at a friend's house and she has a dog who likes to bark a little bit. So he was being pretty good for a while. I'll just try to get away from him. Yeah, so Dunya was saying that she would tell people how to join the meeting and how to get involved. And so I'll leave that for her. But we could definitely use a lot more help. And people will find it very rewarding if they do. Not only will they be helping kids, but they'll be helping themselves as they do so. So thank you so much for the opportunity to speak up. I appreciate it.
Thank you for joining the conversation. I just want to go around and give everyone a chance to leave with a big idea or a last minute message takeaway. Dr. Al-Najjar?
Well, first of all, thank you for inviting me again. I think the one thing I want to say, vaping is bad. I mean, that's the whole message of the day. It's bad as smoking, and people who think that smoking is worse, we can argue about that, but I think vaping is as bad as smoking. The one thing, an idea I think I want to suggest on you is like after COVID, obviously Zoom meeting and these things become more easier. Is there a way to get like each school maybe actually have it part of the school meeting for the students? Like, okay, it's a mandatory meeting once a year. Each class attend one of like a meeting like this about vaping, so they have to listen to it. And I think it might get some education and some ideas for those kids other than just leave it in the public. But I think if we go to the schools, I think that's the most important part probably.
Thank you. Yeah, that's a very good point. And I really appreciate you taking your professional experience to the community, talking with young adults, and sharing how important these decisions are in their overall health and their long-term health. So we will continue these conversations and we will try to find as many opportunities to connect with students and catch them young so that they're making healthy decisions. Rebecca, any big takeaways that you want us or questions you want us to walk away with?
I just want to echo the importance of schools. There was a question about our Paper People program, which is our earliest substance use prevention program. And since the vaping epidemic, we've always talked about smoking cigarettes and alcohol, but since the vaping epidemic, we had to break it down for our young learners and explain to them that we know smoking cigarettes is bad for our bodies. The thing is, smoking cigarettes doesn't always look like regular smoking anymore. There are electric cigarettes that come in different colors and look in lots of different ways. But we know that smoking is always going to hurt our bodies no matter how old we are. So we don't have to do it when we're old enough to do it. And there was a question about counselors in there too, and focusing on support staff. That's another huge point. Having a well-staffed support team in a school with social workers and counselors is a huge piece of the puzzle. So when students are caught vaping, it's not a punitive response. It doesn't make it their identity that they're a bad kid that gets in trouble. It doesn't make them feel like the adults are against them. It really lets them know that people are there who care about them and who want to listen to them and help them learn and are on their side. Really, we're going to win a lot more cooperation from teens when we approach them with that empathy and active listening and really emphasize those kinds of healthy responses to them.
And I'm excited to have the technology to be able to take this conversation, record it, and make it available so people in our community can have access to this information, go back and reference it and share it. So it's not just our group right now, but it is a lot of people. So I encourage people to share this information out, go back and refer to it. Parents, sit down and discuss it with your kids. And before we wrap it up, Dunya, do you want to leave us with those action items? So you have information. Now, what are we going to do with it?
Yeah, so we'll reiterate and go over them again. Just wanted to say before I go through the action items, in the chat area of this Zoom webinar, I put a link to our Facebook page as well as a link to our next meeting, which is also via Zoom, but Representative Laurie Stone can also share that with this video. So our action items, we are asking that individuals that watch this video, go ahead and like our Facebook page and share it. If you find our message important, if you feel like there's someone within your social circle that would be called to do some of this work, please invite them to come and join us. The second one would be and for those that are really interested in learning a little bit more on how we can talk to our youth and what are different things that we can do as community members, Partnership for Drug-Free Kids has a great toolkit that will also be shared on our Facebook page, and Laurie can share it as well. Other than that, if anyone has any questions for us as a coalition, or if you feel like there's different spaces within your community that could use something like this, education to your youth groups, or where we could educate adults so that they can be better suited to work with youth on issues like this, we would love to come in and be able to share some of our knowledge.
Thank you so much. This evening I've learned a lot, and I appreciate your breakdown of legislative actions, Rebecca, because I'm leaving with some ideas to take with me back to Lansing to see how we can take things that, we used for drug-free or smoke-free Michigan and make sure that we can apply them with vaping. It's all about healthy choices. We took the hard line of say no to drugs and the war on drugs. And I think we're starting to wake up to, we need to be respectful of teenagers as individuals making choices and really empower them with knowledge and understanding so they're making healthy choices. So thank you to everyone who joined us. And I look forward to continuing this conversation in the community. And I really encourage you to come out and join the Warren Centerline Prevention Coalition and a lot of the initiatives that we are doing in the community. Have a great evening. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.